I never imagined that winning the lottery would be the beginning of my worst nightmare. My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old. For the past 35 years, I've lived in this house, raised my son Daniel here, watched him grow from a curious boy into a successful man. This home holds every memory of our life together, every birthday, every holiday, every moment of laughter and tears. My husband Thomas passed away 8 years ago. Heart attack. One moment he was laughing at something on television, the next he was gone. Just like that. Life doesn't give you warnings, doesn't prepare you. You just have to learn to keep breathing, keep moving forward. Daniel was 25 then, just starting his career. He helped me through those dark months when I couldn't even remember to eat, when every corner of this house reminded me of Thomas. I worked as a school secretary for 40 years. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. I loved seeing the children every day, their energy, their innocence. Even after I retired 3 years ago, I still volunteer at the school library twice a week. Those kids keep me young, keep me connected to something larger than myself. Daniel met Rebecca 7 years ago at some corporate event. She worked in marketing, always dressed impeccably, always knew exactly what to say in every situation. I tried to like her, I really did. She was beautiful, intelligent, ambitious. Everything a mother should want for her son, right? But there was something in her eyes, something cold that made me uncomfortable. Still, Daniel loved her, and that's what mattered. They got married 5 years ago. Big wedding, over 200 guests, everything perfect down to the smallest detail. Rebecca insisted on planning everything herself. I offered to help, but she smiled that tight smile of hers and said she had it under control. I felt like a stranger at my own son's wedding, sitting there in the dress Rebecca had approved, smiling for photos I was barely in. After the wedding, things changed. Slowly at first, so slowly I almost didn't notice. Daniel started coming by less frequently. When he did visit, Rebecca always had a reason they couldn't stay long. She'd check her phone constantly, sigh dramatically, mention some appointment they had to get to. The Sunday dinners we used to have every week became once a month, then once every few months. I told myself it was natural. They were building their life together, focusing on their careers. Rebecca was climbing the corporate ladder, Daniel was working long hours. They were busy. That's what I kept telling myself, even as the loneliness in this big house grew heavier with each passing day. Then came the lottery ticket. Daniel had started this tradition with his father years ago, before Thomas died. Every Friday, Thomas would buy a lottery ticket with the same numbers, our anniversary, Daniel's birthday, my birthday, combined in different ways. After Thomas passed, Daniel kept the tradition going. He'd stop by every Friday evening, we'd have coffee, and he'd show me the ticket. It was our time together, just the two of us, like when he was young. About 6 months ago, Rebecca started joining him on these Friday visits. At first, I was happy. Maybe she was making an effort, maybe things would get better. But she'd sit there on her phone, barely participating in our conversations, making it clear she'd rather be anywhere else. Still, Daniel seemed happy she was there, so I didn't complain. 3 weeks ago, everything changed. It was a Friday evening, late September. The autumn air had that crisp quality that always made me think of new beginnings. Daniel and Rebecca arrived together, but something was different. Rebecca was actually smiling, actually engaged. She sat down at the kitchen table, accepted the coffee I offered, even complimented the cake I'd baked. Daniel pulled out the lottery ticket like always, set it on the table between us. We talked about their week, about my volunteer work at the school. Rebecca even asked questions, seemed genuinely interested. I remember thinking maybe I'd been wrong about her. Maybe she was finally warming up to me. That night, after they left, I couldn't sleep. I was watching the late news when the lottery numbers were announced. I wasn't really paying attention at first, just had the television on for background noise. Then something made me focus. The first number matched. Then the second. My heart started beating faster. Third number, fourth number, fifth number. All matched. The sixth number came up, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. We had won. 100 million reais. I sat there in my living room, in the house Thomas and I had built our life in, staring at that television screen, not quite believing it was real. I must have checked the numbers 20 times, comparing them to the ticket stub Daniel had left with me like he always did. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what this meant. Daniel could finally start his own business like he'd always dreamed. We could help fund that clinic in the community that desperately needed support. I could set up a scholarship fund at the school in Thomas's name. The possibilities spun through my mind like a beautiful dream. I called Daniel first thing in the morning, my hands shaking as I dialed. His voice was groggy with sleep. Margaret speaking now. I said, "Daniel, honey, you need to come over right away. Bring Rebecca. It's important." He must have heard something in my voice because he didn't ask questions, just said they'd be there in an hour. That hour felt like forever. I made coffee, set out pastries I'd bought the day before, tried to calm my racing heart. When the doorbell rang, I practically ran to answer it. Daniel looked worried. Rebecca looked annoyed at being dragged out so early on a Saturday morning. We sat down in the living room, the same room where Thomas and I had celebrated anniversaries, where we'd watched Daniel open Christmas presents, where we'd cried together after the funeral. I pulled out the lottery ticket with trembling hands, Margaret speaking. "We won," I said. My voice came out as barely a whisper. The lottery. We won. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Daniel grabbed the ticket, checked his phone, checked it again. His face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. Daniel speaking. "Oh my God. Oh my God, Mom. This is real. We actually won." Rebecca snatched the ticket from his hands, her perfectly manicured nails flashing. She stared at it, her mouth opening slightly. I watched emotions flicker across her face too quickly to read. But the final one was something that made my stomach clench. It looked like calculation. Rebecca speaking. 100 million reais. She said it slowly, like she was tasting each word. This changes everything. We spent that morning in a daze, looking up what to do, who to call. Daniel was laughing, crying, pulling me into hugs. We talked about his business plans, about helping the family, about finally taking that trip to Italy Thomas and I had always planned, but never got to take. For those few hours, it felt like my son was really there with me again, present and happy and connected. Rebecca was quiet, which should have been my first warning. She sat in the armchair by the window, scrolling through her phone, occasionally interjecting practical questions about taxes and lawyers and financial advisors. At the time, I thought she was just being sensible, thinking about the logistics while Daniel and I got caught up in the emotion of it all. We decided to wait a few days before claiming the prize, to get our ducks in a row, as Rebecca put it. We'd consult with a financial advisor, a lawyer, make sure we did everything right. It made sense. Neither of us had ever dealt with this kind of money before. That week passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. At the library, I found myself staring at the same page for minutes at a time. At home, I'd walk from room to room, imagining what we could do with the money. Not extravagant things, just security. Comfort. The ability to help people who needed it. Daniel called every day, sometimes twice. He was researching business plans, talking about commercial real estate, about hiring his first employees. His excitement was infectious. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my son back, like we were a family again. Rebecca called too, but those conversations were different. She asked detailed questions about the house, about my finances, about my plans for the future. Margaret speaking. "I'm not sure yet," I'd tell her. "There's so much to think about." She'd make little sounds of agreement, but something about her tone made me uneasy. 8 days after we won, everything fell apart. Daniel and Rebecca came over after work. I'd made dinner, pot roast, Daniel's favorite since he was a child. The kind of meal that takes all day, that fills the house with warm smells and memories. We sat down to eat, and at first, everything seemed normal. Daniel talked about his day, about a difficult client, about his coworker who'd announced her pregnancy. I shared a funny story about one of the children at the library who'd insisted that dinosaurs were just really big chickens. We laughed. It felt almost like old times. Then Rebecca set down her fork. The sound it made against the plate seemed unnaturally loud. She looked at Daniel, then at me, and her expression was all business. Rebecca speaking. "Margaret, we need to talk about the living situation." Her voice was calm, measured, the voice she probably used in board meetings. "We've been thinking about the money, about the future, about what makes sense for everyone involved." I set down my own fork. my appetite suddenly gone. Margaret speaking. What do you mean, the living situation? Daniel looked uncomfortable, wouldn't meet my eyes. Rebecca reached over and took his hand, a gesture that seemed more possessive than affectionate. Rebecca speaking. This house is quite large for one person. It's expensive to maintain, especially on a fixed income. With the lottery money, we think it makes sense for you to downsize. Move into something more manageable. A nice apartment, maybe, or one of those senior communities. They have wonderful amenities, activities, other people your age. The words hit me like a physical blow. Margaret speaking. This is my home. I've lived here for 35 years. Thomas and I bought this house together. Daniel grew up here. Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. Rebecca speaking. Exactly. It's full of memories. Sometimes holding on to the past prevents us from moving into the future. And think practically, Margaret. You don't need all this space, the maintenance, the yard work, the property taxes. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere simpler? I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, to defend our home, to defend me. He was staring at his plate, his jaw clenched. Margaret speaking. Daniel, what do you think about this? He finally looked up, and I saw conflict in his eyes, but also something else. Resignation, maybe, or weakness. Daniel speaking. Mom, Rebecca has a point. This house is a lot for you to handle alone. And with the money, you could afford something really nice. Safe, convenient. Margaret speaking. I don't want something else. I want my home. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. Rebecca speaking. Margaret, let's be realistic. Daniel and I have been talking about starting a family. We need space. This house would be perfect for raising children. It's in a good school district, has a big yard. It makes sense for it to stay in the family. The realization hit me like ice water. They didn't just want me to move. They wanted my house. The home Thomas and I had built, where we'd raised our son, where every corner held a piece of our life together. Margaret speaking. So you want me to just leave? To give up my home so you can have it? Rebecca speaking. Not give it up. Sell it to us. At a fair price, of course. With your share of the lottery money, you could buy a lovely apartment and still have plenty left over. It's a win-win situation. Margaret speaking. This isn't about money. This is my home. Rebecca's expression hardened. Rebecca speaking. You have to think about what's best for everyone, not just yourself. Daniel and I are the future of this family. We need to build our life, raise our children. You've had your turn in this house. 35 years. That's more than enough time. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. Margaret speaking. Daniel, is this really what you want? You want me to leave the house where your father and I raised you? He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that it hurt. Daniel speaking. Mom, I just want everyone to be happy. Rebecca's right that we'll need more space if we start a family. And you'd probably be more comfortable in something smaller, more modern. No stairs to worry about, no yard maintenance. Margaret speaking. I'm 62 years old, not 90. I don't need to be put out to pasture. Rebecca stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Rebecca speaking. We're not discussing this further tonight. You're being emotional and unreasonable. Take a few days to think about it rationally. We'll talk again when you've had time to process. She walked to the door, and after a moment's hesitation, Daniel followed. At the doorway, he turned back. Daniel speaking. Mom, I love you. I just want what's best for everyone. Think about what Rebecca said, okay? We'll talk soon. Then they were gone, and I was alone in the kitchen with a half-eaten pot roast and a future that had suddenly become terrifying. I didn't sleep that night either. I walked through every room of my house, touching the walls, the furniture, remembering. Here was the scratch on the hallway wall where Daniel had crashed his first bicycle indoors. There was the window seat where Thomas would read the Sunday paper. In the living room, I could almost see us dancing on New Year's Eve. Thomas stepping on my toes, both of us laughing. This house wasn't just walls and rooms. It was the physical embodiment of my life, my marriage, my motherhood. And they wanted me to just walk away from it. Over the next few days, Rebecca called multiple times. Each conversation followed the same pattern. She'd start out reasonable. talking about practical concerns and logical solutions. When I refused to agree, her tone would shift, becoming colder, more insistent. She sent me links to apartment complexes, to senior living communities, even to retirement homes. Margaret speaking. I'm not interested in any of these, I told her after the fifth or sixth email. I'm staying in my home. Rebecca speaking. Margaret, you're being stubborn and selfish. Think about Daniel. Think about your future grandchildren. Don't you want them to grow up in a real house with a yard? Margaret speaking. They can grow up in whatever house you buy with your lottery money. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was ice. Rebecca speaking. Our lottery money? Let's be very clear about something, Margaret. That ticket was purchased with money Daniel earned. He's the one who maintained the tradition. You just happened to be there when the numbers were drawn. Legally, morally, that money is his. Ours. You're only entitled to anything because we're being generous. The words were like a slap. Margaret speaking. That ticket was part of a tradition Daniel shared with his father. With me. It wasn't just about money, it was about family. Rebecca speaking. Family, right. Well, family means making sacrifices for the younger generation. It means knowing when to step aside and let others have their turn. You've had a good life in that house, Margaret. Time to move on. She hung up before I could respond. That night, I couldn't stop crying. I called my sister Helen, who lives in another state. I poured out the whole story, everything that had happened since we won the lottery. She was furious. Helen speaking over the phone. That manipulative little snake. She's trying to steal your home right out from under you, and Daniel's letting her do it. I taught him better than that. Margaret speaking. He's caught in the middle. She's his wife. I don't want to make him choose. Helen speaking. He's already chosen, sweetheart. He chose her the day he married her. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Margaret speaking. I don't know. I don't want to lose my son. Helen speaking. You might lose him anyway if you let them push you around like this. Stand your ground, Margaret. Thomas would want you to fight for your home. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, thinking about what Helen had said. She was right. Thomas would never have let anyone force us from our home. He taught Daniel to stand up for what was right, to protect the people he loved. Where had that Daniel gone? When had he become someone who let his wife bully his mother? The next Friday, they showed up unannounced. I was in the garden pulling weeds, trying to keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. I heard the car pull up, heard their voices before I saw them. When I came around the side of the house, they were standing on the porch, Rebecca holding a folder. Margaret speaking. I wasn't expecting you. Rebecca speaking. We need to talk. Now. She pushed past me into the house, Daniel following with an apologetic look. In the living room, Rebecca opened the folder, pulled out papers. She spread them across the coffee table with the precision of someone laying out evidence. Rebecca speaking. These are fair market valuations for the house. We've had 3 independent appraisals done. We're prepared to offer you full market value, plus an additional 50,000 reais for your cooperation and to cover your moving expenses. I stared at the papers without touching them. Margaret speaking. I didn't agree to any appraisals. How did you even arrange these? Rebecca speaking. We have our ways. The point is, we're being more than fair. You'll walk away with enough money to buy a beautiful apartment and live comfortably. Plus your share of the lottery winnings. You'll be set for life. Margaret speaking. My share of the lottery winnings? You mean the money from the ticket that Daniel and I have been buying together for years? The tradition he started with his father? Daniel finally spoke up. Daniel speaking. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to do the right thing here. Margaret speaking. The right thing? The right thing would be respecting my wishes, respecting my home. Rebecca stood up, towering over me. Rebecca speaking. Fine. You want to play it this way? Let's talk legally. That lottery ticket was purchased by Daniel with his money. You have no legal claim to any of it. We've been generous offering you anything at all. But if you want to be difficult, we can be difficult too. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Margaret speaking. Are you threatening me? Rebecca speaking. I'm explaining reality. You're a retired secretary living on a pension and Social Security. Daniel and I are both high earners with excellent legal resources. If this goes to court, who do you think will win? Who do you think can afford better lawyers? We're offering you a peaceful solution, a generous solution. But there are other options if you refuse to be reasonable. Daniel looked sick, but he didn't contradict her. He just stood there letting his wife threaten his mother, offering no defense, no protection. Margaret speaking, "Get out, both of you. Get out of my house." Rebecca smiled, but it was a predator's smile. Rebecca speaking, "Your house. For now." But that can change, Margaret. That can change very quickly. We're giving you 1 week to think about our offer, 1 week to come to your senses. After that, things get much more complicated for you. They left, and I locked the door behind them, my whole body shaking. I slid down with my back against the door, sitting on the floor of my own hallway, feeling more alone than I had since Thomas died. The next few days were torture. I kept expecting Daniel to call, to apologize, to tell me Rebecca had gone too far. But the phone stayed silent. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I left messages that went unreturned. I did research online, reading about lottery law, about family disputes, about property rights. The more I read, the more terrified I became. Rebecca was right about one thing. If this went to court, I'd be badly outgunned. Daniel's name was on that lottery ticket. He'd been the one to physically purchase it every week. My claim was based on tradition, on family understanding, on the fact that we'd always considered it a shared thing. But legally, I wasn't sure where I stood. I made an appointment with a lawyer, spending money I couldn't really afford on a consultation. He was kind but blunt. Lawyer speaking. Mrs. Patterson, family lottery disputes are complicated. Yes, you have some claim based on established practice and implied agreement. But if your son contests it, if he claims sole ownership of the ticket, you'd be facing an uphill battle. And even if you won some portion of the winnings, that doesn't resolve the house situation. They can't force you to sell, but they could make your life very difficult. Court challenges, family pressure, social isolation. Margaret speaking. So I just give up? Let them take everything? Lawyer speaking. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to think carefully about what you're willing to fight for and what that fight will cost you. Not just financially, but emotionally. Family lawsuits leave scars that never fully heal. I left his office feeling defeated. How had my life come to this? 2 weeks ago, we'd won the lottery. It was supposed to be the answer to everything, supposed to make life easier, better. Instead, it had revealed faults in my family I'd been willfully ignoring for years. That night, I got a text message from Rebecca. Just a photo. It was a real estate listing for a luxury apartment in the city's best neighborhood. The text that followed was brief. This could be your new home. Much better than that old house. Offer expires in 72 hours. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room. Another part wanted to call Daniel, to beg him to remember who we used to be, who he used to be. But I did neither. Instead, I made a decision. The next morning, I called Helen. Margaret speaking, I need your help. I need to figure out how to fight this. Really fight this. Helen speaking. It's about time. Tell me everything, and let's make a plan. We talked for 2 hours. Helen had always been the fighter in our family, the one who stood up to playground bullies and unfair teachers and anyone who tried to push us around. She helped me think through my options, my resources, my strategy. Helen speaking. First, you need to document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every text message. Keep a detailed record. Second, you need to secure your own legal representation, someone who specializes in family law and estate disputes. Third, and this is important, you need to go public. Margaret speaking. Public? What do you mean? Helen speaking. Rebecca is counting on you being too embarrassed or too conflict-averse to make a scene. She's banking on the fact that you'll quietly accept whatever she decides because that's what nice older women do. Prove her wrong. Tell your story. Make sure everyone knows what's happening. Family, friends, neighbors. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Margaret speaking. But what about Daniel? If I do this, he might never forgive me. Helen speaking. If you don't do this, You'll never forgive yourself. And Daniel? He needs to see what his wife is really like. You'd be doing him a favor in the long run. I spent that day and the next gathering evidence. I screenshotted every text message from Rebecca. I wrote down detailed notes about every conversation, every threat, every manipulation. I gathered the original lottery ticket receipts that Daniel had given me over the years, proof that this had always been a shared tradition. On the third day, 48 hours before Rebecca's deadline, I acted. I called a family meeting, inviting not just Daniel and Rebecca, but also Thomas's sister Carol, his brother Mark, several cousins, and close family friends. People who had known us for decades, who had watched Daniel grow up, who understood what this house meant to our family. When Rebecca realized what I'd done, she was furious. She called me an hour before the meeting was scheduled to start. Rebecca speaking. "What do you think you're doing? This is a private family matter." Margaret speaking. "These people are family. They have a right to know what's happening." Rebecca speaking. "You're trying to manipulate Daniel through social pressure. It won't work. We'll leave before your little ambush even starts." Margaret speaking. "Then everyone will know you refuse to face them. That says something too, doesn't it?" She hung up, but when the time came, they showed up. Rebecca looked like she was ready for battle, dressed in an expensive suit, her makeup perfect, her expression controlled. Daniel looked miserable, caught between the two women in his life. Everyone gathered in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated so many happy occasions. Now it felt like a courtroom. I stood near the fireplace, where Thomas's photo still sat on the mantel, drawing strength from his memory. Margaret speaking. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, but I need you to hear what's been happening since Daniel and I won the lottery. I need witnesses to the truth." I told them everything, the demands that I move out, the threats, the appraisals done without my permission, the deadline Rebecca had given me, the implication that I had no real claim to the lottery money. I kept my voice steady, stuck to facts, showed them the text messages. The room was silent when I finished. Then Carol, Thomas's sister, spoke up. Carol speaking. "Rebecca, is this true? Did you really tell Margaret she had 24 hours to agree to move out of her own home?" Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. Rebecca speaking. "That's not exactly how it happened. Margaret is being dramatic, twisting things to make me look bad." I held up my phone. Margaret speaking. "I have the text message right here. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Daniel stood up. Daniel speaking. "Mom, please. This isn't fair. You're trying to turn everyone against us." Mark, Thomas's brother, shook his head. Mark speaking. "Daniel, I watched you grow up in this house. I was here the day your parents brought you home from the hospital. Your father would be ashamed of what you're allowing to happen right now." Daniel flinched like he'd been struck. Daniel speaking. "Uncle Mark, you don't understand. It's complicated." Mark speaking. "It's not complicated at all. Your mother raised you better than this. We all did. And if your father were here right now, he'd tell you exactly what I'm telling you. Stand up for what's right. Stand up for your mother." Rebecca tried to regain control of the situation. Rebecca speaking. "Everyone here is getting a one-sided story. Margaret is acting like a victim, but the reality is she's standing in the way of progress, of our future. We have every right to want to start our family in a proper home." Carol speaking. "Then buy your own proper home. You won 100 million reais. You can afford whatever you want. Why does it have to be Margaret's house?" Rebecca speaking. "Because it should stay in the family. Because Daniel grew up there. Because it makes sense." One of the family friends, an older woman named Dorothy who had been my neighbor for 20 years, spoke up. Dorothy speaking. "Rebecca, dear, let me tell you something. Family isn't about who has the most money or the most power. It's about respect, about love, about taking care of each other. What you're doing to Margaret isn't family. It's cruelty dressed up in logical arguments." The meeting went on for another hour. Person after person spoke up, most in support of me, a few trying to mediate, nobody fully supporting Rebecca's position. I watched Daniel's face as his family, the people who had loved him his entire life, told him he was wrong. When everyone finally left, Daniel and Rebecca stayed behind. We sat in my kitchen, the three of us, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Daniel speaking. Mom, that was a terrible thing to do. Airing our private business in front of everyone. Margaret speaking. It stopped being private when your wife started threatening me. When she gave me ultimatums about my own home. He rubbed his face with both hands. Daniel speaking. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in the middle. Rebecca is my wife. You're my mother. I love you both. Margaret speaking. Then choose love over greed. Choose what's right over what's convenient. Rebecca stood up. Rebecca speaking. This isn't over, Margaret. You won this round by playing on everyone's emotions, but facts are facts. Daniel bought that lottery ticket. This house is too big for you. We will have our family and we will have the home we deserve. With or without your cooperation. She walked out, leaving Daniel and me alone. My son looked at me with tears in his eyes. Daniel speaking. Why couldn't you just go along with it? Why did you have to make it into this big thing? The question broke my heart. Margaret speaking. Because this is my home, Daniel. Because your father and I built a life here. Because I have a right to live out my days in the place I've loved for 35 years. I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to remember who you are, who you were raised to be. Daniel speaking. I can't go against Rebecca. She's my wife. I made vows. Margaret speaking, and I'm your mother. That's a bond that existed before she came along and will exist after. But I can't make you be the person I raised. That has to come from you. He left without saying goodbye. I sat alone in my kitchen, wondering if I'd just lost my son forever in the fight to keep my home. The next few weeks were brutal. Daniel didn't call. Rebecca sent increasingly hostile text messages, each one more threatening than the last. She hired a lawyer who sent me formal letters demanding I vacate the property, claiming Daniel had sole ownership of the lottery winnings and suggesting I was trespassing on what should rightfully be their property. I hired my own lawyer, a woman named Jennifer who specialized in elder law and family disputes. She was fierce, smart, and didn't let Rebecca's intimidation tactics work. Jennifer speaking. They're trying to bully you into submission because they know their legal case is weak. Yes, Daniel bought the ticket, but it was part of an established family tradition. The Lottery Commission recognizes implied agreements in family lottery pools. Plus, the house is yours, free and clear. They have no legal claim to it whatsoever. Margaret speaking. But they have more money than me. They can drag this out until I'm broke. Jennifer speaking. Let them try. I'm taking this case pro bono if necessary. What they're doing is wrong, and I don't like bullies. The story got out in the community. Small towns talk, and this was too good a story not to spread. The school where I volunteered heard about it. My neighbors heard about it. Soon, people were stopping me at the grocery store, offering support, sharing their own stories of family conflicts over money. One afternoon, I got a call from a local news reporter. They'd heard about the dispute and wanted to do a story. I hesitated, but Jennifer encouraged me to talk to them. Jennifer speaking. Public opinion matters. If they paint you as a greedy old woman trying to steal her son's lottery winnings, it hurts our case. But if people see the truth that you're a mother being forced from her home by a manipulative daughter-in-law, that helps. I agreed to the interview. It aired on the local evening news 2 days later. I watched it at home, alone, seeing myself on screen talking about Thomas, about our life in this house, about the lottery tradition Daniel and his father had started. The reporter was sympathetic, the story was fair, and the reaction was immediate. My phone rang constantly. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years calling to offer support. Strangers sending messages of encouragement. Someone started an online petition supporting my right to stay in my home. It got thousands of signatures in a matter of days. Rebecca was livid. She called me screaming, accusing me of trying to destroy their reputation, of turning Daniel into a villain, of manipulating public opinion. I listened to her rage without responding, then hung up when she started using language I won't repeat. But the pressure worked. Daniel called that night. His voice was strained, exhausted. Daniel speaking. Mom, we need to talk. In person. Just the two of us. Can I come over tomorrow? Margaret speaking. Of course. This is still your home too, Daniel. It always will be. He arrived the next afternoon, looking like he hadn't slept in days. We sat in the living room, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Daniel speaking. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About Dad, about you, about the man I want to be. Rebecca is furious with me right now, but I need to say some things. Margaret speaking. I'm listening. Daniel speaking. You were right. About everything. I let Rebecca push me into something I knew was wrong. I convinced myself it was practical, that it made sense, that you'd be better off in a smaller place. But the truth is, I was being selfish. We wanted this house, and I let that desire override my love and respect for you. He started crying, and I moved to sit beside him, putting my arm around him like I had when he was a child. Daniel speaking. Dad would be so disappointed in me. I can hear his voice in my head, telling me what a coward I've been. How he raised me better than this. Margaret speaking. Your father loved you more than anything in the world. He'd want you to learn from this, to grow from it, not to beat yourself up forever. Daniel speaking. I don't know if Rebecca and I will survive this. She's convinced I'm choosing you over her, that I'm being manipulated. But Mom, you're not manipulating me. You're just standing up for yourself, which is what you should have been doing all along. Margaret speaking. What do you want to do? Daniel speaking. I want to make this right. The lottery money should be split evenly between us. That's what Dad would have wanted. That's what's fair. And this house is yours, for as long as you want to live here. If Rebecca and I want a house, we'll buy our own with our share of the money. Margaret speaking. What about starting a family? Rebecca said you needed this space. Daniel speaking. We can start a family anywhere. We don't need to do it by kicking you out of your home. That's not the kind of father I want to be anyway, the kind who prioritizes a house over his own mother. We talked for hours that afternoon, really talked, the way we used to before Rebecca came along. He told me about the pressure she'd been putting on him, the arguments they'd been having, how she'd convinced him that I was being unreasonable and standing in the way of their future. Daniel speaking. I see now how she operates. Little manipulations, twisted logic, making me feel guilty for even considering your perspective. I don't know when I became so weak, when I lost my spine. Margaret speaking. Love can make us blind to things we don't want to see. I understand that better than you know. I saw the red flags with Rebecca early on, but I didn't want to say anything because you seemed happy. Daniel speaking. I think I've been confusing intensity with happiness. Rebecca is intense, driven, focused. But there's no softness there, no real compassion. Not like you and Dad had. Not like I thought marriage was supposed to be. Margaret speaking. What will you do? Daniel speaking. I don't know yet. But I know I need to stand up for what's right, starting with you. I'm going to talk to Rebecca tonight. Really talk, not just go along with whatever she says. If she can't respect my relationship with you, if she can't understand why pushing you out of your home was wrong, then we have bigger problems than I thought. He left as the sun was setting, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I thought everything would magically be resolved, but because I had my son back. The real Daniel, the one Thomas and I had raised, not the shell of a man Rebecca had been molding him into. The next week was radio silence. No calls, no texts, nothing from either Daniel or Rebecca. I tried not to worry, tried to trust that Daniel was handling things. Jennifer kept working on the legal case, preparing documents that formally divided the lottery winnings and protected my rights to my home. During those silent days, I found myself reflecting on my entire marriage to Thomas, on the life we'd built together. I'd pull out old photo albums, sit at the kitchen table, and remember. There was our wedding day, both of us so young, so full of hope. There was Daniel as a baby, then a toddler, then a boy losing his first tooth. Every milestone documented, every memory preserved. One afternoon, I was in the attic, something I hadn't done in years. Up there, among the boxes and old furniture, I found letters. Letters Thomas had written to me during our courtship, letters I'd saved but forgotten about. I sat on the dusty floor and read them, tears streaming down my face. In one letter, Thomas had written about the kind of father he wanted to be. Thomas writing in the letter. I want to raise a son who knows the difference between right and wrong, who stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves, who understands that real strength isn't about power or money but about character. I want him to see how I treat you, how I respect you, and learn that's how you treat the person you love. Reading those words, written decades ago by a man who'd been gone for 8 years, I felt his presence so strongly, It was like he was sitting beside me. Thomas had raised Daniel to be exactly that kind of man. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had lost sight of those lessons, but they were still in him. Our conversation had proven that. I also found a box of Daniel's childhood things: his first baseball glove, worn and cracked with age, report cards from elementary school, all showing excellent marks in citizenship and character, a Father's Day card he'd made when he was 7, the front decorated with crayon drawings of him and Thomas. Inside, in his careful child's handwriting, it said, "You are the best daddy in the world because you are nice to everyone and you make mommy smile." I held that card for a long time, crying for the little boy who'd written it, for the man who'd read it with tears of joy in his eyes, for the complicated present we were all navigating. How do families fall apart like this? How do the values we work so hard to instill get lost in the noise of adult life? During this quiet week, I also spent time with my neighbors. Dorothy from next door brought over a casserole, sat with me in the kitchen for hours. She'd been through her own family struggles, had a daughter who didn't speak to her for 5 years over an inheritance dispute. Dorothy speaking. The thing about family conflicts is they force you to decide who you really are. Are you someone who stands up for yourself, or someone who gets walked over? Are you someone with principles, or someone who abandons them when they become inconvenient? You've shown who you are, Margaret. You've shown strength. Margaret speaking. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like I'm tearing my family apart. Dorothy speaking. You're not tearing it apart. Rebecca did that when she decided your home and your dignity were acceptable casualties in her quest for what she wanted. You're just refusing to go quietly. There's a difference. I also received a surprising visitor that week. Rebecca's mother, Patricia, showed up at my door one evening. I hadn't seen her since the wedding, and I was shocked when I opened the door to find her standing there looking nervous and uncomfortable. Patricia speaking. Margaret, I hope you don't mind me coming by unannounced. I heard about what's been happening, and I needed to speak with you personally. I invited her in, made tea, waited to hear what she had to say. Patricia sat in my living room, looking around at the photos on the walls, the comfortable furniture, the lived-in warmth of a real home. Patricia speaking. Rebecca called me last week, told me her version of events. About the lottery, about the house, about how you were being unreasonable and standing in the way of their future. She wanted my support, wanted me to call you and convince you to see reason. Margaret speaking. And are you here to convince me? Patricia shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. Patricia speaking. No. I'm here to apologize. I know my daughter Margaret. I know how she operates. I raised her, and I failed her in some fundamental way because she grew up believing that what she wants is more important than other people's feelings or rights. Margaret speaking. That's very honest of you. Patricia speaking. It's necessary. Rebecca's father and I got divorced when she was 12. It was ugly, bitter, fought over every asset and every piece of furniture. I think Rebecca learned from that experience that relationships are transactional, that love is conditional, that you have to fight for what's yours before someone takes it from you. I tried to teach her differently, but the divorce shaped her more than my words ever could. Margaret speaking. I'm sorry you went through that. Patricia speaking. Don't be sorry for me. Be careful of my daughter. She sees this house, this lottery money, as a prize to be won. She's convinced herself that she deserves it, that she's entitled to it, and she'll use every manipulation at her disposal to get it. I've seen her do this before, in her career, in her friendships. She identifies what she wants and removes any obstacle in her path. Margaret speaking, including her husband's mother. Patricia speaking, especially her husband's mother. You represent everything she's not. Warmth, genuine love, a life built on relationships rather than achievements. It threatens her somehow, makes her feel inadequate. So she needs to diminish you, to move you out of the center of Daniel's life so she can fully control him. We talked for over 2 hours that evening. Patricia shared stories about Rebecca's childhood, about warning signs she'd seen but hadn't known how to address. She talked about her own regrets, about wishing she'd raised her daughter differently. Patricia speaking. I want you to know that if this goes to court, if Rebecca tries to legally force you out or challenge your claim to the lottery money, I'll testify on your behalf. I'll tell the truth about her character, about her patterns of behavior. She's my daughter and I love her, but that doesn't mean I condone what she's doing to you. Margaret speaking. That must be incredibly difficult for you. Patricia speaking. Being a mother is always difficult. We want to protect our children, but sometimes protecting them means protecting them from themselves, from their worst impulses. Maybe if someone had stood up to Rebecca earlier, drawn clear boundaries, she would have learned that she can't always get what she wants. Maybe it's not too late for her to learn that now. After Patricia left, I felt strangely hopeful. Not because I thought her testimony would be needed, but because it reminded me that not everyone in this situation was against me. There were people who saw the truth, who understood what was really happening. I also spent time during that week working on plans for the scholarship fund in Thomas's name. I met with the school principal, with the district superintendent, with a financial advisor Jennifer had recommended. We designed a program that would help students from low-income families attend college, with preference given to those who demonstrated strong character and community service. Principal Martinez speaking. This is incredibly generous, Margaret. Thomas would be so proud. He always cared about giving kids opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. Margaret speaking. He believed everyone deserved a fair shot. That circumstances of birth shouldn't determine your entire future. I want to honor that belief. Working on the scholarship gave me purpose during those anxious days of waiting. It reminded me that the lottery money could do real good, could change lives in meaningful ways. This was what wealth should be used for, not tearing families apart or forcing elderly women from their homes, but creating opportunities and hope. I also started writing. Not just notes or letters, but really writing. I wrote about Thomas, about our life together, about the lessons we'd learned and the love we'd shared. I wrote about Daniel's childhood, about the funny things he'd said and done, about the pride we'd felt watching him grow. I wrote about the present situation, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Writing helped me process everything, helped me see patterns I'd missed. I realized that Rebecca's behavior hadn't started with the lottery. There had been smaller incidents over the years, times when she'd manipulated situations to her advantage, when she'd isolated Daniel from people who might question her, when she'd slowly worked to undermine my relationship with my son. The lottery had just raised the stakes, made her tactics more obvious and more aggressive. On the 6th day of silence, I got an unexpected phone call from Daniel's best friend from college, Marcus. He and Daniel had been inseparable during their university years, but Rebecca had managed to create distance between them after the wedding. Marcus speaking. Mrs. Patterson, I hope you don't mind me calling. Daniel reached out to me a few days ago, told me what's been happening. I wanted you to know that a lot of us, his old friends, we've been worried about him for years. We've seen how Rebecca controls him, how he's changed since he married her. Margaret speaking. Why didn't anyone say anything? Marcus speaking. We tried. A few of us sat him down about 2 years ago, told him we were concerned. Rebecca found out and was furious. She convinced Daniel we were jealous of their success, that we were trying to sabotage their marriage. One by one, she pushed us out of his life. But we never stopped caring about him. And we never stopped caring about you. Margaret speaking. That means more than you know, Marcus. Marcus speaking. Daniel's staying with me right now, actually. Not at a hotel like he told you. He didn't want you to worry, but he's been here for 3 days. We've been talking, really talking, about everything. About his marriage, about his father, about the man he wants to be. He's finding his way back, Mrs. Patterson. It's hard and it's painful, but he's doing it. This conversation gave me hope that Daniel wasn't alone, that he had people supporting him through this difficult time. It also made me realize how much damage Rebecca had done over the years, how she'd systematically isolated Daniel from everyone who might encourage him to think for himself. Then, exactly 1 week after our conversation, Daniel showed up at my door. He was alone. His eyes were red, his face drawn, but there was a strength in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Daniel speaking. We're separating. Rebecca and I. At least for now. Maybe permanently. I moved out 3 days ago, been staying at a hotel while I look for an apartment. Margaret speaking. Oh, Daniel, I'm so sorry. Daniel speaking. Don't be. This has been coming for a long time. I just couldn't see it because I didn't want to. But when I told her I wouldn't go through with forcing you out of your home, When I said the lottery money would be split fairly between us, she lost it completely. She said things I can't unhear, revealed parts of herself I can't unsee. Margaret speaking. What kind of things? Daniel speaking. She told me I was weak, that I was choosing a sad old woman over our future. Those were her exact words. A sad old woman. Talking about you, Mom. The woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, who stood by me through everything. And she honestly couldn't understand why that bothered me. He sat down heavily on the couch. Daniel speaking. There was more. She admitted she'd been planning this whole thing from the beginning, from before we even won. She saw you as an obstacle to what she wanted, and she'd been working on me for months to see you the same way. Making little comments about how the house was too much for you, how you seemed lonely, how it would be better for everyone if you moved somewhere more manageable. Margaret speaking. Manipulation takes many forms. Daniel speaking. I feel like such an idiot. How did I not see it? How did I let her poison me against my own mother? Margaret speaking. Because you loved her. Or you thought you did. And because nobody wants to believe the person they married is capable of cruelty. We see what we want to see until we can't anymore. We spent that evening talking about everything, about his marriage, about his future, about what he wanted his life to look like. For the first time in years, he seemed truly himself. Not performing for anyone, not trying to be who someone else wanted him to be. Over the next month, things slowly settled into a new normal. Daniel found an apartment not far from my house. We went back to having Sunday dinners, just the two of us like old times. The divorce papers were filed. Rebecca fought it at first, then seemed to realize she'd lost this battle and settled quickly. But the healing process wasn't simple or straightforward. Daniel struggled with guilt, with second-guessing himself, with mourning the future he'd imagined with Rebecca. Some days he'd come over angry at himself for being so blind. Other days he'd be sad, grieving the loss of his marriage, despite knowing it was the right choice. Daniel speaking. How did I become that person, Mom? The one who would hurt you to make her happy. I look back at some of the things I said, the things I was willing to do, and I don't even recognize myself. Margaret speaking. We all have the capacity to lose ourselves in relationships, especially when someone is skilled at manipulation. Rebecca was very good at making you doubt your own judgment, at framing everything in ways that made her desires seem reasonable, and your resistance seem selfish. Daniel speaking. I remember this one time, about a year ago. I wanted to come visit you on Mother's Day, just bring you flowers and spend the afternoon. Rebecca said we had brunch plans with her colleagues, that it was important for my networking. I actually felt guilty for wanting to see my own mother on Mother's Day. How messed up is that? Margaret speaking. She was very skilled at using your ambition, your desire to succeed, to pull you away from anything that might interfere with her plans. But you saw through it eventually. That's what counts. We talked for hours during those weeks, unpacking years of subtle manipulations, recognizing patterns, understanding how Rebecca had slowly isolated him and reframed his reality. It was painful for Daniel, but necessary. He needed to understand what had happened so he wouldn't fall into the same trap again. The divorce proceedings revealed even more about Rebecca's character. She hired an aggressive lawyer who tried every tactic to maximize her share of Daniel's lottery winnings and assets. She claimed she'd sacrificed her career potential to support Daniel, which was laughable considering she'd always been more ambitious than him. She demanded the car, the furniture, everything they'd accumulated during the marriage. Jennifer, who was helping Daniel as well as me now, saw right through it. Jennifer speaking. This is classic financial abuse disguised as legal strategy. She's trying to punish Daniel for standing up to her by taking everything she can. But we have documentation of her harassment, her threats, her manipulation. The judge will see who the real victim is here. She was right. The judge, a woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen her share of divorce cases, was not impressed by Rebecca's tactics. She awarded a clean 50-50 split of marital assets, rejected Rebecca's inflated demands, and made it clear in her ruling that Daniel's lottery winnings were separate property since the ticket purchase tradition predated the marriage. Rebecca's lawyer tried to argue that the lottery ticket was purchased during the marriage with marital funds, but Jennifer produced years of receipts showing the tradition went back to before Thomas died, establishing it as a family practice independent of Rebecca. The day the divorce was finalized, Daniel came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a child, where Thomas and I had shared thousands of meals. Daniel speaking. I'm free, Mom. Legally, officially free. And you know what the strangest thing is? I feel lighter than I have in years. I didn't realize how heavy that relationship was, how much energy it took to constantly manage her moods and meet her expectations. Margaret speaking. Now you can figure out who you are when you're not performing for someone else. Daniel speaking. I've been thinking about what Dad would say if he were here. I think he'd tell me I messed up badly, but he'd also be proud that I eventually did the right thing. He always said it's not about never making mistakes, it's about what you do after you make them. Margaret speaking. Your father made plenty of mistakes. He just had the wisdom to learn from them and the courage to admit when he was wrong. You have those same qualities, Daniel. You proved that. The lottery money was officially divided. With Jennifer's help, we set up a trust that split everything down the middle. Daniel used his share to finally start the business he'd dreamed about, a consulting firm that specialized in helping small companies optimize their operations. I used mine to set up the scholarship fund in Thomas's name, to donate to the school library, to help fund that community clinic, and to ensure I'd be comfortable for the rest of my life in my home. Starting the business was therapeutic for Daniel. It gave him something constructive to focus on, something that was entirely his. He rented office space, hired an assistant, started reaching out to potential clients. Within 6 months, the business was thriving. Daniel speaking. You know what's funny? Rebecca always said I wasn't ambitious enough, that I didn't have what it takes to run my own business. But I'm doing it now, and I'm doing it well. Maybe I just needed to be free of her constant criticism to actually believe in myself. Margaret speaking. Confidence is hard to maintain when someone is constantly undermining you. Your father always said you had what it takes. I think you're proving him right. The house remained mine, legally and officially. Jennifer made sure every document was airtight, that there was no way anyone could ever try to take it from me again. I stayed, of course. Where else would I go? Every room still held memories, still whispered stories of the life Thomas and I had built, of the son we'd raised, of the joys and sorrows that make up a full life. I made some changes, though. I repainted Daniel's old room, turned it into a proper guest room. I updated the kitchen, something I'd been wanting to do for years but never had the money for. I planted new flowers in the garden, varieties Thomas and I had always talked about trying. The house was still mine, still held all its memories, but it was also evolving, growing with me into this new phase of life. Dorothy helped me with the garden renovations, spending weekends turning soil and planting bulbs. Dorothy speaking. You're blooming too, you know. I've watched you over these past months. You're standing taller, speaking more confidently. Fighting for yourself changed something in you. Margaret speaking. I think I forgot who I was for a while. After Thomas died, I was just Daniel's mother, just a widow, just someone defined by my relationships to other people. This whole ordeal forced me to remember I'm my own person, with my own rights and my own worth. Dorothy speaking. Thomas would be proud of you. So proud. About 6 months after everything was resolved, I was working in the garden when Daniel showed up unexpectedly. He helped me pull weeds for a while, working side by side in comfortable silence. Then he set down his trowel and looked at me seriously. Daniel speaking. I've been seeing a therapist, talking through everything that happened, trying to understand how I lost myself so completely. She's helped me see patterns I couldn't see before. Margaret speaking. That's good, honey. That takes courage. Daniel speaking. She asked me to make amends to the people I hurt. Not just apologize, but really make amends. And you're at the top of that list, Mom. I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. Not just for what happened with Rebecca and the house, but for years of letting you down, of choosing her over you, of letting her push you to the margins of my life. Margaret speaking. You don't have to keep apologizing. I've forgiven you. Daniel speaking. I know you have. But I need to say it anyway. I need to acknowledge what I did, how I failed you. You were there for me every single day of my life until I married Rebecca. You raised me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. And I repaid that by letting someone treat you terribly, by joining in treating you terribly. That's not who you raised me to be. We sat on the back porch as the sun set, drinking iced tea, watching the garden grow golden in the fading light. Daniel told me about therapy, about the work he was doing to understand himself better, to set healthier boundaries, to rebuild his life on firmer foundations. Daniel speaking. I owe you an apology, Mom. A real one, not just the ones I gave before. I let you down in the worst possible way. I forgot who I was, what you and Dad taught me. I chose comfort over courage, took the easy path instead of the right one. Margaret speaking. You found your way back. That's what matters. Nobody walks a perfect path. We stumble, we fall, we make mistakes. The measure of a person is whether they learn from those mistakes, whether they grow. Daniel speaking. I learned that I never want to be that person again, the one who was willing to hurt you to make his wife happy. The one who valued a house and money over the woman who gave him everything. Margaret speaking. You also learned that you're stronger than you thought. You stood up to Rebecca even knowing it would cost you your marriage. That takes real courage. We sat on the back porch as the sun set, drinking iced tea, watching the garden grow golden in the fading light. It wasn't the future any of us had imagined when we won that lottery, but somehow it was better, more honest, more real. Daniel speaking. Do you regret it? Winning the money? Everything that came after? I thought about that for a long moment. Margaret speaking. No. As painful as it all was, it showed me truths I needed to see. It showed me who really had my back. It showed you what your marriage really was underneath the surface. If we hadn't won, you might have spent decades in that relationship before finally seeing the truth. The money didn't change Rebecca. It just revealed who she always was. Daniel speaking. Silver linings in everything, huh? You sound like Dad. Margaret speaking. Your father taught me that life is what you make of it. Even the hardest experiences can teach us something if we're willing to learn. The months turned into years. Daniel's business thrived. He started dating again, eventually meeting a woman named Lisa who was kind and genuine, who treated me with respect and warmth. When they got married, a small ceremony in my backyard, I cried happy tears for the first time in a long time. They bought their own house, not far from mine. When they had their first child, a little girl they named Amelia, I became the grandmother I'd always dreamed of being. Every Sunday, they'd come over for dinner, and Amelia would run through the same rooms her father had run through decades earlier. One afternoon, when Amelia was about 3, she asked me about the pictures on the mantel. I showed her photos of her grandfather, told her stories about the man she'd never got to meet. She listened with wide eyes, then pointed to a picture of the house. Amelia speaking. This house is magic, Grandma. Daddy grew up here, and now I get to come here all the time. Margaret speaking. Not magic, sweetheart, just full of love. That's what makes a house a home. Not how big it is or how new it is, but how much love lives inside its walls. She nodded solemnly, then ran off to play in the garden where her father and grandfather had played before her. I watched her from the kitchen window, this beautiful little girl who existed because Daniel had found the courage to stand up for what was right. Because we'd fought for family instead of giving in to greed. Sometimes I still think about those dark weeks after we won the lottery, when it seemed like everything I loved was being torn away. I think about the fear I felt, the loneliness, the betrayal. But mostly I think about what we all learned. We learned that family isn't automatic. It requires work, respect, and the courage to fight for each other. We learned that money reveals character more than it changes it. We learned that home isn't just a building, but a feeling, a collection of memories and love that can't be bought or sold or taken away by force. The lottery ticket that started it all is framed now, hanging in my study. Not as a trophy of wealth, but as a reminder. A reminder that winning isn't always what we think it will be. That sometimes the greatest prize isn't money, but the clarity to see what really matters. Daniel comes by often, sometimes with Lisa and Amelia, sometimes alone. We sit in the living room where Thomas's photo still watches over us, where we celebrated that lottery win that seemed like a blessing, but turned out to be a test. A test we passed, eventually, though not without cost. On quiet evenings, I walk through my house, touching the walls, remembering. This is where Thomas and I danced on our anniversary. This is where Daniel took his first steps. This is where we cried together after the funeral. This is where we fought for our family and won. This house has stood for 35 years, and it will stand for as long as I need it. It's mine. truly and completely, in ways that have nothing to do with deeds or documents. It's mine because of the life I've lived within its walls, because of the love that soaked into its foundation, because I fought for it when someone tried to take it away. People sometimes ask me if I'd do anything differently, knowing what I know now. Would I have shared the lottery news? Would I have fought so hard for the house? Would I have called that family meeting that changed everything? My answer is always the same. I wouldn't change a thing. Because every choice I made, every stand I took, every moment of courage and fear and heartbreak led me here. To this home. To a son who rediscovered his integrity. To a granddaughter who fills these rooms with laughter. To a life that isn't perfect but is authentically mine. The lottery gave us 100 million reais, but it cost us so much more than money could measure. It cost us innocence, a marriage, the comfortable illusions we'd been living with. But in return, it gave us truth. And truth, I've learned, is worth more than any jackpot. I'm 64 now, still living in the house on Maple Street, still volunteering at the school library, still tending the garden Thomas and I planted together. Daniel stops by every Sunday without fail. Amelia calls me almost every day to tell me about her adventures. Lisa treats me like her own mother, not because she has to, but because she genuinely cares. This is my life. Not the one I imagined when I was young, not the one I thought I'd have when we won that lottery. But it's mine, earned through love and pain, and the stubborn refusal to let anyone take what matters most. The other day, Amelia asked me what I'd buy if I won the lottery again. I thought about it carefully, looking around at my home, at my family, at the life I've built from the rubble of that initial chaos. Margaret speaking. I wouldn't buy anything, sweetheart. I already have everything I need. A home filled with memories, a family that loves me, and the knowledge that I'm strong enough to fight for what matters. You can't buy those things, no matter how much money you have. She hugged me tight, and over her shoulder, I saw Daniel watching us with tears in his eyes. He'd become the man his father raised him to be, the man I always knew he could be. It just took almost losing everything for him to find his way there. That's the real story of what happened when we won 100 million reais. Not the money itself, but what we learned about ourselves, about family, about what we're willing to fight for and what we're willing to sacrifice. It's a story about finding strength when you thought you had none left, about standing up to bullies even when they wear the face of family, about the difference between a house and a home. And every single day, as I sit on my porch watching the sun set over the garden, I'm grateful. Not for the money, though it's made life easier in many ways, but for the journey, for the battles fought and won, for the truth revealed, for the family reclaimed, for the home that remains mine, now and always, until the day I join Thomas wherever he's watching from. This house has been my sanctuary, my fortress, my home for 35 years. And if I've learned anything from this whole experience, it's that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Love is worth fighting for. Family is worth fighting for. Home is worth fighting for. And I did fight, and I won, and that victory is sweeter than any lottery jackpot could ever be.